Hello everyone, welcome back to the Jayda InStitches show and the final episode in our 2018 calendar blanket project, the Victorian Stitch Sampler. This year, I can't believe how quickly it went by, we made a blanket that was built of 12 different stitches. So this makes for a very busy blanket, and as a result, we want to create a border that's simple, elegant, but very unifying all at the same time. So we're taking our inspiration from our humble little divider row. We're going to use the same color that we've been using for our divider row as well as the same stitch. This will give the border a simple, unified look without taking away from the impressive nature of a lot of the stitches we did. Now, if you want to make a bigger border or you have a lot of yarn left over from this project and you want to use some of it up, I have suggestions, which I'll share with you near the end of the video, for additional ways you can add on to the border for this blanket. But for now, we're just going to make something nice and simple and plain. So let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, head on over to the craft table, and we will add a border to our 2018 calendar blanket together. In order to add the border to our 2018 calendar blanket, you're going to want approximately 250 grams of your divider row color. Now you can make the entire border using this, or you can change it up. There's an opportunity to switch up to one of the other colors you were using in your blanket, but you want to have at least enough of your border, or I should say your divider color, so that you can do the very basic border row. So the first border row around our blanket. This will help to unify the whole blanket and pull the whole thing together. You also want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and the same hook we've been using all along. It's a 5.5 millimeter, also known as an I or a 9 in the US, or a size 5 in the UK. You also need your blanket, and once you've got all that together, we can get started. All of our divider rows consisted of double crochet, so we're going to keep with that little continuity all the way throughout the first row of our border because we want to unify the entire blanket. So that's what it looks like right side up. I've got it upside down because we're going to start all the way back at the bottom corner of January, or little fishes. And we're going to take our divider row color, we're going to make a slip knot, and you're going to pick up your blanket. So this is the bottom, this is January, this is the underside of little fishes, and you're going to find the very bottom corner space. That's it right here. And into that space we're going to join our yarn with a slip stitch. We're going to chain 3. That chain 3 will count as a double crochet, and we're going to work 2 more double crochet into this space. We're actually going to treat this corner space like we would if we were making a granny square. So 3 double crochet, and one of those is a chain 3, chain 2, and work 3 more double crochet all into that same corner space. So we're setting up a shell essentially for one side of the blanket and also for the bottom of our blanket. So that's how we start. In the bottom corner space of January, or the little fishes stitch, join with a slip stitch, chain 3, 2 more double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet, all into the same place. Into each one of these big spaces all the way across, you're going to work 3 double crochet. You're not going to chain in between, you're just going to work double crochets, kind of like we would be doing if we were putting in another divider row. So 3 double crochet in each of those big chain spaces. So skip the little ones, you just want to focus on the big ones. There'll be 40 of those spaces all the way across, and you'll have 40 groups of those 3 double crochets all the way across as well. And I'll catch up with you in the other corner. Alright, not including those 3 other, so that chain 3 and those 2 double crochets, which I said counts sort of as the grouping of 3 or a shell for the side of our blanket. You start in the chain 2 corner and you count your groups of 3 all the way across the bottom of your blanket. You should have 40 of them. So 120 stitches. You've worked your last group of 3 into that last stitch, so that last big space at the end of little fishes, and we're going to do the same thing that we started the row with. We're going to chain 2, turn our blanket, we're going to work 3 more double crochet into that same space. That is basically giving us a corner, And then I'm going to rearrange the blanket here and we're going to start working little groups of 3 double crochets all the way up the side of our entire blanket. We're going to work an even set of groups of 3s all the way up the side of our blanket. And when I say even in this case, I don't necessarily mean even number. I mean an even look. So you want a nice even flat row of groups of 3 double crochet running up the edge of your blanket. So we're going to try and space them out as best we can since all of our stitch patterns are a little bit different. We're going to do this one stitch pattern at a time. So we've chained 2, worked a 3 double crochet shell into the same stitch so that we've worked our corner. Now we're looking at the first side of our blanket and we're going to identify these 4 triangular spaces. So not the upside down triangle, or I should say not the triangle sort of that looks like a point at the top, it's the flat side at the bottom. So we want this space, this space, this space, and this space. We're going to work 3 double crochet into each of those spaces. So you've got 4 more sets of 3 double crochet to work up the side of little fishes. So we're not chaining in between, we're just working double crochet all the way up and we're grouping them in sets of 3. So that's what the side of little fishes looks like. There's a set of 3 double crochet in every other space running up the side. Every time you get to the edge of a divider row, just find whether it's a chain 3 or a double crochet, and you're just going to work 3 double crochet around that stitch. So it doesn't matter if it's chain 3 or an actual double crochet. The edge of every divider row gets 3 double crochet worked into it. That brings us to February, or the primrose stitch, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 double crochet edges that create a space, and that's what we're going to use. So we're going to work 4 sets of 3 double crochet into each of those. And that's what the 4 sets of 3 double crochet look like worked into the edge of the primrose stitch. That brings us up to a divider row, and you work 3 double crochet into that. This is the side of a lady's fan. This was March, and a lady's fan is pretty tall, and because it's a little bit snug coming through February, we want to make up for it a little bit throughout March. So what we're going to do is we're going to add 6 groupings of 3. So we're going to work 1 here, here, and here, 1 here, here, and here. So I'm going to do it with you. 3 double crochet into that first space. And like I said, we want to evenly space them out. So even if you decide to put them in a different place, you want 6 groups of 3 running up the side of a lady's fan. We're going to skip over this, and that's the next space we're working into. 3 double crochet. There's the next one, right next to it, 3 double crochet. And that leaves us with 3 more to work into the side of March. We're going to skip this, we're going to move to this one, and we're going to grab this one and this one as well. So 1, 2, 3. 3 double crochet into each of those spaces. And then we have 6 groups of 3 double crochet worked into the edge of March. That brings us up to a divider row, and you want to work 3 double crochet into the edge of every divider row. Now we're into April, falling leaves, one of my favorite stitches. We're going to use these little tiny spaces that appear all the way up the edge of April. So there's one, I'll help put my hook through it. There's one there, there's one right here, and right here. So there's 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. You want to work 3 double crochet into each of those 4 little spaces, and then 3 double crochet into the edge of the next divider row. And that's what those 4 groupings of 3 double crochet look like worked across the edge of falling leaves, or April. One more into the edge of the divider row. That brings us to May, which is the triangle trains. Same thing, we're going to grab the edge. So there's 4 of these chain 3s or double crochets running up the edge. you're just going to grab that and work 3 double crochet around each of those 4 edge stitches. And there we've got 3 double crochet worked into the edge of each of those triangles, running up the edge of May. 3 double crochet worked into the edge of the next divider row. That brings us to June, which is open shells and picots. Same thing, you should have 4 large sort of spaces created by the chain 3s that run up the edge. So you just want to work 4 more groups of 3 double crochet up the edge of June. So there is the 4 groups of 3 double crochet running up the edge of June. A group of 3 double crochet in the edge of the next divider row, and that brings us to July, which is the Old Country Bridges stitch. You should have 5 very big spaces running all the way up the edge. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So you want to work a group of 3 double crochet into each of those giant spaces. So you'll have 5 groups of 3 running up the edge of July, and then of course add 3 double crochet in the end of the next divider row. So that is 5 groups of 3 double crochet running up the edge of July's stitch, so 1 in each of those big spaces, and of course 3 double crochet in the edge of the next divider row. That brings us to August, which is the X's and O's. Now there are 7 spaces created by those 4 turning chains or those tall treble crochets on the edge of X's and O's. And because you probably noticed that because we only worked 5 across July, which pulled it in just a little bit, we're going to work 1 group of 3 double crochet in each of those 7 edges up the edge of August for 2 reasons. August's stitch is a little taller than a typical double crochet, being a treble, and also we want to give a little bit more ease back to July over here. So find the first chain 3 or chain 4 I should say, or treble crochet along the edge of August, work 3 double crochet into it, and then do the same thing for each of those 7 spaces created up the side of X's and O's. That's 7 groups of 3 double crochet, 1 group worked into the edge of each of those 7 rows from August's X's and O's, and of course 3 double crochet worked into the edge of the next divider row. That brings us to September, which is the waffle stitch, and we're only going to use these 5 spaces that run up the edge of the waffle stitch, so we're kind of doing every other row. So you're going to find the first edge or double crochet to work your first 3 stitches around, and then you're only going to do it 4 more times up the edge of September. So there's 1, there's 1, there's 1, there's 1. It's every other row. So there's 5 groups of 3 worked up the edge of September's waffle stitch. A group of 3 worked in the edge of the next divider row. That brings us to October, or the cobweb stitch. We're also going to work only 5 groups of 3 double crochet up the edge of this too. So you're going to pick the first space you come to, which might look a little small. Skip over the next one, grab the next big one. Skip the small one, grab the next big one. Skip the small one, grab the next big one. Skip the small one, grab the next big one. So it's those bigger spaces that you want to use, and you'll have 5 groups of 3 double crochet running up the edge of October as well. Working 5 groups of 3 double crochet up the edge of October helps to contain it. It is a bit of a stretchy stitch, so that does help to contain it. 3 double crochet worked into the edge of the next divider row. That brings us to November, which was the soaring split shell pattern. We're going to work a 3 double crochet group into the end of each of those split shells. So not the spaces in between, the ends of the actual split shells. So 3 double crochet into each edge of a soaring split shell, and you'll have 4 groups up the round, or I should say up the edge of November. That's 4 groups of 3 double crochet running up the edge of November, plus a group in the edge of the next divider row. That does create a little bit of tightness, but that's okay. We're going to make up for it in December. So December is the last stitch. We've got an edge at the end of every row. So you're going to have 8 rows here, or 8 spaces, and you're going to work into 3 double crochet into each of them. So for the final stitch pattern of the year, you're going to work 8 groups of 3 double crochet up the edge of December. So we worked 8 groups of 3 up the edge of the cookie stitch, which was December, which helps give a little slack back to November. So that's 8. It takes us right up to the very edge. We're going to do another corner. So we're going to chain 2. That creates a space. And into the same space that we worked those last 3 double crochet, we're going to work 3 more double crochet. Okay, including the space that we just finished working in, this one right here, we have 25 spaces running all the way across the very top of our blanket, or the cookie stitch, right over to the last space, or the last little corner here. So that's 25. We have 120 stitches running along the bottom of our blanket, and we want to get 120 stitches to run along the top of our blanket too. So we've already started with these 3, worked into the corner. Into each of these big spaces all the way across, you're going to work 5 double crochet. So we're breaking with our 3 double crochet tradition, just briefly, because it's very important that we have 120 stitches running across the top. So into each of those big spaces, work 5 double crochet, and I'll hook up with you when we get to the very end of the cookie stitch. Alright, that's 5 double crochet in each of those big spaces all the way across the top of the cookie stitch, and that brings us to the very last space. So this is a strange little number. So in order to make sure that we have 120 stitches all the way across, we're going to cheat a little. Into this last space, which is also going to be a corner space, we're going to work 2 double crochet. And if you were to count them up, that should be your 120th stitch. So we started, you ignore the 3 double crochet shell that's sort of still on that side of the blanket. You start by counting the shell, or the 3 double crochet that start that row. And then 5, so 3 and then 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, all the way across to the very end where we work 2, and that's 120 stitches. We're going to chain 2. Turn the work so that you're looking at your other raw edge, and you're going to work the exact number of 3 double crochet little shells all the way down the side of your blanket that you did on the other side. So if you can't remember, you just scoot over to the other side of the stitch you're on, count up the number of 3 double crochet shells, and make sure you're working the same number into the opposite side of the blanket stitch. Every divider row gets a 3 double crochet shell in the end of it. And like I said, if you can't remember, just scoot across to the other edge of that stitch, count up the number of 3 double crochet shells that run across the edge of it, and that's what you have to do on the other side. I'm going to let you work away at that, and just to begin that row, we're going to work 3 double crochet into the same space. So that'll complete our little corner on our blanket. So 2 double crochet, a little cheat, to complete our row of 120 stitches. Chain 2, 3 double crochet all into the same space, and then you're going to repeat the same 3 double crochet shell groupings all the way down the edge of this blanket side that you did on the other side. Once you've finished working your little 3 double crochet shells all the way down the other edge, so you have the exact same number of 3 double crochet shells on the edge of each stitch pattern that you do on the opposite side, and of course 1 in the end of every divider row. That brings us up to the first shell we created when we started our little border row. Find the top of the chain 3 and slip stitch to join. If you want to continue and add a couple more rows of border, whether you use the same color or change, I recommend that you slip stitch across the top of those 2 stitches all the way into the corner space, and if you were to start another row, you would chain up from this space and begin your stitches in the space. I am going to end my border right here. I love the simplicity of the little white border that ties in every little border row all the way around. It doesn't distract from all of the impressive stitch work that we did this year, and it's a nice simple way to use up the rest of my yarn. Now, if you want to add a couple more rows, I have some suggestions for you. If you want to add a couple more rows to your blanket border to make it a little thicker, here are some suggestions. I recommend starting in a chain 2 corner. If you didn't fasten off your yarn because you have a lot of your divider row color left and you want to continue using it, then slip stitch into the corner back at the bottom where we joined, and you can start from there. If you're changing colors, you can join your new color in any chain 2 corner space and with a slip stitch, and you can start your stitches from that corner. If you wanted to add a row of single crochet, half double crochet, or double crochet, I would recommend working 1 stitch into the top of every single one of your stitches all the way around. So you're ignoring the spaces between your shells, you're just concerning yourself with the stitches. The only difference is when you'd get to a chain 2 corner. You could work 2 stitches, chain 2, 2 stitches into every chain 2 corner. And that would give you a little more edge, a little more color if you wanted to change colors, and it's a nice way to use up some of your yarn. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure that we had 120 stitches across the top of our blanket and 120 stitches across the bottom of our blanket was to ensure that we had an even stitch count of a multiple of 3 on every side. So your 2 sides, your top and your bottom, each stitch count is a perfect multiple of 3. So, if you wanted to get a little sassy and you had some leftover yarn and you wanted to try using one of the blanket stitches that we learned, or even one that you're familiar with that's a multiple of 3 base stitch pattern, you could work that stitch pattern all the way around because every side is a perfect multiple of 3, which means you can base a 3 multiple stitch pattern on it. So primrose stitch, the V-stitch, any one of the stitches we learned this year that might be based on a multiple of 3, even more granny shells. The only thing you would have to concern yourself with is the top here. These are little groupings of 5, so you'd actually have to count your stitches. So you'd work a 3 double crochet shell into every 3rd stitch across the top of your blanket. So there are a few ideas if you want to continue adding some rows to your blanket. Me, I'm going to leave it like this because I like the continuity of that little double crochet stitch running in between all of my stitch patterns and then unified all the way around the edge by the same stitch. Double crochets in off-white. It's kind of like a little sorbet to cleanse your palette in between stitch guides. And there you have it. A simple but elegant border for our 2018 calendar blanket, and that wraps it up in a nice, neat package. I really enjoyed making this project this year. I loved getting to know 12 different stitches so differently and incorporating them all into a single project. And now if I'm working out a design for a project down the road and I want to try a specific stitch pattern with it, I have 12 readily available that I can go and take a look at and decide if it fits my design needs. And that's essentially what this whole project was about. Learning a stitch pattern, making up a sample, and having it available to you for future reference. But in the meantime, we also made it into a great big blanket, which will look quite nice cast upon your couch. If you're interested in getting a written pattern for any of the stitch guides that we worked through this year, we have them all available for sale in our Etsy shop, and we'll leave a link to that in the description box down below. If you're giving this away, or you want it to look presentation ready, or you just want to even out some of the edges that may look a little funny, simply because the different patterns worked up a little differently, you can block your blanket. And now that we've got it all together and the border's on, now's the time to do it. You can steam block it or you can wet block it. Either one is perfectly fine. And if you've never done blocking before, we have tutorials for both of those blocking concepts, and we'll leave links to those in the description box down below as well. Thank you guys so much for working on this project along with us this year. We hope you enjoyed making this blanket as much as we did, and we will see you soon on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, stay cozy, and have a great week. Bye everybody!